There are numerous strategies for protecting your income in retirement. I've already covered several of the strategies for spending your money in last week's video, but as I mentioned in last week's video, depending on your situation and goals, it's entirely possible that none of those strategies really stood out to you. If that's the case, then I'm hoping that today I'll be able to stumble upon one of the strategies that's just right for you. Because today I'm going to be going over 4 more retirement withdrawal strategies that are more dynamic in nature. I'm going to be showing you how they work, discussing their pros and cons using the 4 factors of retirement, and hopefully helping you to decide which will work best for your own financial situation. Let's get started. But before we get going, be sure to like this video if you haven't already, as it really does help out the channel a lot, and subscribe with notifications on for more money-related videos like this one every single week. The first retirement withdrawal strategy we'll cover today is known as the 1/n method. A common complaint when using a typical retirement withdrawal method like the 4% rule is that the percentage withdrawn usually assumes the worst-case scenario. They attempt to set it up in a way that we never run out of money. And while that may not be the case 100% of the time, it is the case in the vast majority of scenarios. But that conservatism also means that in the vast majority of scenarios, you won't actually use a good chunk of your nest egg. Admittedly, on a personal level, to me, being the cautious guy that I am, that isn't really even an issue. I'd rather have a healthy amount of money left over, both for my own sanity and stress levels while I'm alive, as well as for an inheritance to my family or a gift to someone or something when I'm dead. But I know that that's not the case for everybody. Some people do consider having too much money left over when they pass away an issue. The 1/n method attempts to fix that. It does this by figuring out how much money you can withdraw each year by basing the n in the 1/n equation on how many years you have left that you expect to need to withdraw the money. This allows you to withdraw as much of your money as possible over a predetermined length of time. For example, if John retired at the age of 70 and was expecting to withdraw his money until he was 80, in this case 10 years worth of withdrawals, the letter n in his equation would be equal to 10 in his first year of retirement. If we assume, just like in last week's video, that John's retirement nest egg is $1 million, that would mean he would withdraw 1/10, or 10%, of his nest egg that first year. That would give him $100,000 to live on, and $900,000 left over in his nest egg. The letter n in the equation gets adjusted each year to reflect how many years' worth of withdrawals you still expect to make. So by the time John reaches his second year's withdrawals, assuming nothing has changed and he still expects to live until he's 80, he would have 9 years worth of withdrawals left to make, and would therefore take 1/9, or a little over 11% of his total nest egg in his second year. If we assume that John's investments grew by 8% in his first year of retirement, that would mean that come year 2, he would have a net worth of $972,000, and would withdraw 1/9 of that, or $108,000, to live on for the year. This would leave him with $864,000 in his nest egg. And this process would of course continue, with John withdrawing 1/8 of his investments in year 3, 1/7 of his investments in year 4, and so on until in the final year of his retirement, he withdraws the rest of his investments. One nice thing is that because the portion of your investments that are being withdrawn each year are going up, even if the market doesn't grow like it did in the past, you can still maintain most of your standard of living. For example, if the market stayed absolutely flat in John's retirement, he would have withdrawn $100,000 in his first year of retirement, just like he did before. That would leave him with $900,000 left over. In year 2, he'd withdraw 1/9 of that $900,000, or again, $100,000. He'd do the same thing in year 3. Inflation would erode this buying power slowly over time, but you'd still be able to maintain most of that initial lifestyle. Unless, of course, the market crashes. If the market had dropped by 20% over the course of John's first year in retirement, he wouldn't be able to withdraw $100,000 in that second year. After the crash, his portfolio would be worth about $720,000. 1/9 of that is about $80,000 in income for John. A potential con to using this strategy that I'm sure you've all already thought of is if you live longer than you're expecting to, you run the risk of outliving your money. This can be managed to a certain degree by taking the amount indicated by the 1/n method as an absolute maximum amount that you can withdraw each year, but not one that you actually always have to withdraw. For example, John could say that the $100,000 this strategy told him he could withdraw in his first year of retirement is the most he can take out, but there's nothing wrong with choosing to take out $75,000 that first year and leaving the rest of his nest egg to grow. This would give him more of a cushion down the road should he need money for longer than he was initially expecting, but there is still always going to be a risk. That's just what happens when you're using a method that is primarily focused on the income factor of retirement. So in summation, based on the 4 factors of retirement, the 1/n method scores very highly, as we would expect, on income, but is fairly low in risk. The stability is likely to be roughly average for most of us. And by average, I mean good most years, but not so good here and there due to occasional market crashes. And buying power will likely be solid, since most well-diversified portfolios at least keep pace with inflation. But that's enough for the 1/n method. The second strategy that I want to discuss today is the Guyton-Klinger method. This strategy is one I've already gone over in a previous video, and it is a bit complicated compared to the other methods we've discussed. The reason for that is it has quite a few rules that need to be followed. I won't go into too much detail here. Like I said, I already did an in-depth video on the method that'll be linked in the description below if you want to learn more, but in brief, the Guyton-Klinger strategy has 4 rules that you need to follow. They are the withdrawal rule, the capital preservation rule, the prosperity rule, and the portfolio management rule. The withdrawal rule tells you how much of your portfolio you're going to start withdrawing and is usually expressed as a percentage of your total nest egg. So it's very similar to the 4% rule in that respect. It also gives you guidance on what order to withdraw your money in, how to increase your withdrawals over time, and puts caps on those increases in certain unusual circumstances, which some find helpful and others needlessly complicated. The capital preservation and prosperity rules are very similar to each other. The capital preservation rule is there to help ensure that your withdrawals don't become too large over time thanks to great investment performance. And the prosperity rule makes sure that your withdrawals don't become too small over time. Both rules basically state that if your withdrawals increase or decrease beyond 20% of your initial target withdrawal rate, then you should adjust your withdrawal amount by 10% to get back on track. So they kind of act like financial guardrails to make sure that your standard of living doesn't decrease too much over time, but at the same time doesn't allow your standard of living to get so high that you run the risk of outliving your savings. The portfolio management rule is, to grossly oversimplify, basically just a rebalancing formula. The main idea is that you should withdraw your money from the gains of your nest egg in order of best to worst performance over the previous year, and move any excess gains you may have into a cash account for the next year's withdrawals. So say that you had $2 million in your nest egg, and they were equally split between stocks and bonds. If the value of your stocks fell by 5% last year, and the value of your bonds increased by 5%, you should withdraw the entire $50,000 worth of gains from your bonds before even touching your stocks using this rule. And if you were going to withdraw less than $50,000 to live on for the year, then the remainder of those gains that you took out would be moved into a cash account to supplement your next year's withdrawals. In the end, the Guyton-Klinger method scores above average in terms of income initially, but falls to below average levels in longer-term retirements due to the reductions and freezes that it implements in certain market conditions. It scores above average in terms of risk, but below average in terms of stability and buying power. The third retirement withdrawal strategy for today's video is known as the variable percentage method. The variable percentage method is a more dynamic take on the standard fixed percentage withdrawal method we covered last week. Instead of just sticking to a flat percentage of your nest egg to withdraw each year, this method takes into account other factors, including your age and how much of your money is in various investments like stocks and bonds. The Boggleheads Wiki has a handy table that shows you how much of your nest egg you should be withdrawing each year depending on your age, or if you're married, the age of the youngest member of the couple, as well as your asset allocation. If you were to use this method, here's how the process would work each year. First, figure out how your money is going to be allocated between stocks and bonds for the upcoming year. And then take a look at the withdrawal table to figure out what percentage you should be withdrawing at your age. Let's say, for example, that John and Jane are 42 and 40 years old respectively. They still have their $1 million nest egg and it's split evenly between stocks and bonds for the upcoming year. Since Jane is the younger of the two, it will be her age that is used when looking at the withdrawal table. We see that a 40-year-old with an even stock and bond split should withdraw 3.8% of their nest egg, or in this case $38,000 to live on for the year. Next, John and Jane would withdraw the $38,000 and rebalance their investments so that they match the allocation percentages that they planned on having for the upcoming year, in this case 50% to stocks and 50% to bonds. They will rinse and repeat this process every year because the percentages that they will withdraw do change over time since they're getting older. This strategy's income scores vary a bit depending on your age and asset allocation. For the very early retiree, it scores below average on income, because while the income does rise throughout your retirement as you're getting older, the income factor of retirement puts some extra weight on your early withdrawals, since you can't quite guarantee that you'll be around to experience the later ones. But for people retiring at a roughly average retirement age, it would score a little above average. The method scores a little above average in risk, and similar to the 1/n strategy, its scores in stability and buying power largely depend on what investments your money is currently in, but they'll usually fall somewhere between average and good for most well-diversified portfolios. The fourth retirement withdrawal strategy I want to talk about today is known as the 3 buckets withdrawal strategy. This is another one that I've already technically covered in full on this channel, link in the description below if you want to learn more, but the fact of the matter is some people don't like the idea of a systematic withdrawal strategy because of the risk factors involved. For example, if you retired and followed the 4% rule right before the market crashes, you still need money to live on, and unless you have income coming in from other sources like Social Security, pensions, or some form of side hustle, you're going to need to sell your investments, potentially at a significant loss, in order to just put food on the table. With the idea of avoiding that eventuality as much as humanly possible, some retirees have adopted a bucket strategy, which can vary a bit from person to person, but generally works something like this. You divide your nest egg into 3 sections, or buckets, each with a different purpose. The first bucket is usually any money that you'll need in the near future. This is where we start to see the variation in the strategy, because I've seen some people have 1 to 2 years worth of expenses in this bucket, and I've seen others that have had as much as 8 to 10 years of expenses. It all depends on your situation, goals, and risk tolerance. But this first bucket usually contains very safe investments like cash and cash equivalents, such as treasury bills, money market funds, and the like. It should be enough to cover all of your ongoing expenses that aren't already covered by things like Social Security, including the major ones that come up from time to time like vacations, car and home repairs, and so on. This bucket is not going to make you much money, but that's not its purpose in this strategy. After all, when you get fire insurance, you aren't going to get mad when your house doesn't burn to the ground. Think of this bucket as sort of like your market crash insurance. It's the money that protects the money that actually makes you money. And it does this by giving you another place for income that doesn't involve selling your investments when they're at their lowest point, thereby allowing you to let your investments recover from the market crash before dipping into them. So that's the first bucket, any money that you'll need in the next few years. Say 2 for this video. The second bucket is for any money that you won't need in those next 2 years, but will need in the next 10 years, and generally contains more risky investments up to and sometimes even including stocks. The major purpose of this bucket is to earn enough money that it can refill the first bucket as time goes along. With that being the case, a lot of times people using the bucket strategy will fill their second bucket with income-producing assets, such as high-yield bonds and dividend-paying stocks. The third and final bucket is for long-term investments that you won't need to touch for the next 10 years or more, and are generally more of the high-risk, high-return variety. Some examples of investments that may go in this bucket are stocks, normally ones with high growth potential, and real estate, and sometimes alternative investments like commodities will also go here. So those are the basics. You have your cash bucket, your income bucket, and your investment bucket. Your cash bucket protects you from market crashes and usually contains a few years' worth of investments. Your income bucket helps to refill the cash bucket as time goes along and usually contains income-producing assets. And your investment bucket is for those growth investments that are meant to skyrocket your net worth over the long term. But on the whole, the 3-bucket strategy tends to be slightly below average in terms of income, slightly above average in terms of risk, and solid in both stability and buying power. As with all of these list-style videos, this is by no means an exhaustive list of retirement withdrawal strategies. There are just a few that I feel people should be aware of when choosing which strategy will work best for them. Some other strategies you may want to look into if none of these seem to be right for you are the Hebler Autopilot Method, created by Henry Hebler, the Retirement Accounts Multiple, or RAM for short, created by Craig Israelson, A variable CAPE method, which I know quite a few people like and I'm sure I'll do a video on at some point or another, or even explore the possibility of semi-retirement like Robert Clyett talks about in his book Work Less, Live More. Whichever way you choose to go, the key is finding the path that works best for you and your situation. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about achieving financial independence, you can check out my videos on the 4 factors of retirement and the 10 levels of financial independence with the links on the screen. And as always, thanks for watching.